It's a great pleasure to be able to talk to you in Ireland. I'm sorry I can't be there personally. I'd really like a glass of Tullamore Dew or a Guinness, but we're living in an age of technology, so we might as well use the technology for me to communicate with you. I'm going to start by sharing 5 principles to guide teaching in a digital age, and then I'll end with answering 3 questions that were put to me beforehand. I will give my views on HyFlex learning, the theory of transactional learning and other theories of learning using digital technology, and probably the most contentious of all, do we need a teaching qualification for instructors in higher education? Now, my first principle is quite an old one, goes back to one of my early books in 1996. Good teaching may overcome a poor choice of technology, but technology will never save bad teaching. So if you don't get the teaching right, it doesn't matter what technology you're going to use. My second principle is that teaching is a skilled discipline with strong theory and research to support decision making. However, most instructors in higher education are unaware of or ignore such knowledge. But this knowledge must be applied if we're going to use technology effectively in teaching. The third principle is that it's no good merely replacing or adding technology to existing processes. You need to change the process if you're going to exploit fully the benefits of technology. And the process here, of course, is your method of teaching. And in order to change your method of teaching so that you make best use of technology, a good theory of teaching and learning can act as a guide. My fourth principle is that there is a continuum of technology-based learning, from no use of technology at all, such as face-to-face teaching without even classroom aids, such as maybe a seminar, right through to fully online learning. And in particular, we're moving into an age where that middle sector, blended and hybrid learning, is becoming more and more important. So we no longer have 2 separate worlds, one of distance, fully online, and one of purely face-to-face teaching, but we're now seeing a mix of that. And that means that every instructor now has to make a decision about where their course should be on that particular continuum. My fifth principle is that neither face-to-face teaching nor online learning is going to go away. Thus, we need to identify for any specific teaching context what each does best. That is, what are the teaching affordances of online learning and face-to-face teaching? And in particular, we need to look at the different affordances of synchronous and asynchronous learning. What does each do best? One guideline for determining whether to go online or teach face-to-face is the law of equal substitution. That means basically you can use either face-to-face or online learning just as well, except, and it's the exceptions that we have to focus on, because those will identify what the affordances are. The question then is, why should students get on the bus to come to campus? What is the added value you're giving to the students in your teaching, as distinct from all the other social activities that go on? What is it in your teaching that makes it worth their while coming to the campus? How are you using that experience of them being together with each other on the campus that would make the experience different from the more convenient way for most students of studying online? Other principles besides these that can be used in online and face-to-face teaching, and you'll find these set out in my open online textbook, Teaching in a Digital Age. But these principles are enough to help guide me answer the 3 questions that were put to me. And the first question is, what do I think of HyFlex? Well, the problem I have in answering that question is that there are multiple definitions of HyFlex. The question I was given gave one definition, which is students in class and students are online are simultaneously taking the same lesson. And usually that means that either a lecture or a webinar is done, and students can either be in class or take it online. I have a broader definition of HyFlex than that, and that's the ability of a student to take a class in any mode they want, face-to-face, blended or online. And that's a much broader definition than the one about students taking it simultaneously. So to answer the question about HyFlex learning, I'm saying that HyFlex learning must take account of the different contexts of learning between face-to-face students and online students. They're in different contexts. Online learners are at home and alone, they're distant, and probably they would prefer to learn asynchronously to fit their teaching around the other aspects of their life, such as looking after kids at home or working part-time and so on. Whereas students in class, they're with other students and the teacher, and they're learning synchronously. And the issue is, if you're dealing with HyFlex, you've got to accommodate both of those in your teaching. So the narrower definition doesn't really do that, because students have to learn synchronously at a specific time. So really, HyFlex requires a total redesign if it's going to be used properly. I prefer the model where students, particularly if you already have an online distance course as well as a face-to-face course that covers the same subject area, that students could choose between either one of those, having already designed those. So they could mix it. If they wanted to come in class, they could. If they wanted to do it partly online, they could. If they wanted to do it fully online, they could. So that's a much more flexible method, but you need two versions of the course to be able to do that. And I suspect that to deliberately design a course as HyFlex requires too much total redesign, and it's probably too challenging to be effective. The next question is, what do I think of Michael Moore's theory of transactional learning? This is a useful theory. It's a useful set of guidelines to keep in mind, whatever mix of online and face-to-face teaching you're using. What is Moore's theory of transactional learning? Well, it's basically about the balance between three different elements: the amount of structure in the course, how much it's organized and how the student should work through that; the amount of dialogue in the course between the student and the instructor, or students and students; and the amount of autonomy allowed to the learner in how they can go about learning the course and so on. And he argues that you've got to get that transactional distance right. If you have too much of any one of these or too little of any one of these, then the teaching is less effective. And I think, as a general principle, being aware that you need to look at the structure, the amount of communication within the course, and how much autonomy you give your students, and that would probably depend on whether they're novice students or experienced students, then that's a very good design principles. But it's not the only theory that I think is useful in blended and hybrid learning. For instance, I find Garrison, Anderson and Archer's community of inquiry theory particularly helpful in both online and blended learning, fully online and blended learning. They look at three aspects, again, of the course. One is the amount of social presence. How much do the students interact with each other on the course? Cognitive presence, that's how much do they engage with the teaching materials and so on. And very, very importantly for me, the teaching presence. How present is the teacher in the teaching? Are the students aware that the teacher's interested in what they're doing, is following what they're doing, not just through assignments, but through other activities such as discussion forums and so on? And you have to get all three of those right. Again, it's a balance, but they're all very important in my view when students are studying, particularly at a distance, but also in a blended learning environment. The Michael Moore and the Garrison, Anderson and Archer theories are fairly specific to online and distance learning. But there are other theories that are equally important, especially as we start to mix face-to-face and blended teaching together. For instance, I think that it's important to know the difference between behaviorist, cognitivist, constructivist, and connectivist approaches to teaching. These are basic pedagogies. They work through not only the K-12 the school system, but also through the post-secondary system. And they're all useful in the design of technology-based learning. And now for the fun question. Should you need a qualification in order to teach in higher education? Being qualified in your subject discipline is necessary but not sufficient, especially if you're teaching with technology. But I don't think this is going to change very much. I don't think we're going to require ever people to be qualified in teaching in order to teach in higher education. And I want to go through some of the reasons for that. First of all, we would need to change the criteria for appointment. The main criteria for both appointment and for promotion is basically, in most universities at any rate, research rather than teaching. We'd also have to change the PhD program so that those who want to go on to work in higher education and who are doing a PhD, it should also include developing teaching skills. And this isn't going to happen from within. There are too many, what I might call prejudices or interests to protect in this area. The unions would probably stop it, and it would have to come from outside, and that would really mean government regulation. And I have two problems there. One, I think it does affect the autonomy of university professors if the government's telling them what they need to know and learn in order to teach. And I don't think governments are competent to do it. I think in the United Kingdom there was an attempt in the 1990s to bring it in, and it totally failed. So I don't see it happening. I think the alternative is to work on the basis that most instructors want to do a good job when they're teaching. They want to be good at their teaching. And if we're going to have a mix of online and technology-based teaching as well as face-to-face teaching, we need to provide resources for instructors who want to do a good job. And that means providing training resources online, on demand as needed, and open access so they can find them anywhere on the internet. During COVID-19, the University of British Columbia developed about 9 very short modules on how to teach online, and that proved very, very useful in the pandemic for many instructors who were suddenly thrown into online learning without any help. But as well as providing training resources, we need increasingly to work with experts who do have knowledge of best teaching practices with technology. These are called instructional designers. What it means basically that you need teamwork. So the answer to this question is twofold. We need really good, high quality, open educational resources that can help instructors when they have a particular issue in their teaching, when they want to know how to design a good video, for instance. And we also need increasingly to work in a team, as working with instructional designers, web designers, graphic designers, and so on, if we're using technology for teaching. And that means, of course, the institutions have to provide that level of support for instructors now if we want high-quality technology-based learning in our institutions. Given the time I have available, I think that now wraps it up. You can see on the screen further resources on this. I would particularly recommend my book, online, free, downloadable, called Teaching in a Digital Age, which contains this and everything I've spoken about and a lot more. And I wish you all great success in your teaching. It is a big challenge moving to more technology-based teaching, but we do have the knowledge and the methods that will enable us to succeed, and I wish you all the best in the future. Thank you.